people in the future. There are no people. There are no people in the future. No people at all. There are no people in the future. Where did all my people go? There are no people in the future. Let me try my people call. Where are all my people? Where are all my people? I guess I'll fly away now.
Everybody, welcome. Yes, it is Monday, September 18th, 2023. Welcome to Raging Chickens, Out to Coop Live. This is Kevin Mahoney, editor and founder of Raging Chicken. On Out to Coop Lives, we talk to progressives, activists, and troublemakers of all sorts, right from our own backyards across the country. You can join us also at the end of the week for our Friday Politics Roundup, where we break down the good, the bad, and the ugly in state and national politics. You can get all our shows by subscribing to our podcast on Podbean, iTunes, Spotify. Look, wherever you get your podcasts, we're there. You can help support this show right now, becoming a patron for as little as $5 a month. Head over to patreon.com/rcpress for all the details. And you can help out the show right now by heading over to our YouTube channel if you're not there already. Smash that subscribe button, like the stream for this show, and hit that notification bell so you know every time that we go live. And if you're one of our awesome podcast listeners, make sure to leave us that 5-star review on whatever platform you listen on, and leave a comment to let other folks know why you like the show. Little things like this help other people find the show. And if you're looking for more PA Progressive Talk, tune into the Rick Smith Show's live stream at 9 p.m. Eastern, YouTube, Twitter, Facebook, wherever you get a live stream. And subscribe to his podcast wherever you get your podcasts. Check out the ricksmithshow.com for the latest across all his platforms. And you got to check out the Sisters of the Night Caucus podcast. The amazing PA women stirring the political cauldron behind this podcast rock the house. And they know where the bodies are buried. And it's spooky season too. Make sure to follow them on Twitter at the Night Caucus. That's at the Night Caucus on Twitter. And subscribe to their podcast on Anchor, Spotify, iTunes, or wherever you get your podcast. And if you haven't heard, The Signal is a new podcast of the Bucks County Beacon. The Signal is hosted by the Beacon's editor-in-chief, Cyril Mychalejko, and produced by yours truly. Twice a month, The Signal will shine a light on right-wing extremist currents streaming through Bucks County and beyond. Cyril invites guests who can provide insight, analysis, and organizing solutions so that we can steer the community towards calmer, saner, progressive roots. And in case you missed it, the Beacon has also just launched a brand spanking new Gen Z-focused and hosted podcast called The Civic Circle. The first episode just dropped and it rocked. You can get both those podcasts right now at thebuckscountybeacon.podbean.com or wherever you get your podcast. Attention all you gamers out there, The Game In is a Quakertown-based black family-owned gaming store. They're friends of the show. They've got everything from retro N64s, the latest consoles, video games for all platforms, collectibles, action figures, Funko Pops, walls of Funko Pops. And kids get discounts when they get A's on their report cards. School's in session, folks. Check them out on their Facebook page and follow them on Twitter at The Game In. That's with 2 N's. If you've got a question about a game, looking for something hard to get, shoot them a message or drop them an email at thegameinpa@gmail.com. And a special shout out goes to Jonathan Mann, who wrote our intro song, There Are No People in the Future. Check out all his great stuff on his YouTube page and follow him on Twitter at SongADayman. Again, 2 N's, at SongADayman on Twitter. Or X, I guess, is how we look at it. Well, tonight's show, I am absolutely thrilled about tonight's show. I've been looking forward to this for quite some time now. This week, I welcome Cyril Mychalejko and Emily Smith to the show. Cyril, of course, is the editor-in-chief of the Bucks County Beacon, and Emily is the publisher of the Bucks County Beacon. Now, we're going to be talking about the role of independent, community-based media in deepening local democracy and organizing against the rise of extremism in our communities and our schools. We'll also be talking about their goals for their fall fund drive and plans for expanding the Beacon's work in the months and years to come. Now, in addition to his lead role as editor-in-chief of the Beacon, Cyril has over 2 decades of journalistic experience. His work has appeared in the Bucks County Courier-Times, The Intelligencer, Upside Down World, Common Dreams, Truth Out, and many more. And Emily Smith, the Beacon's publisher, is a seasoned design professional with nearly a decade of experience in strategic communications. Emily has spent nearly 2 decades working with startups and small businesses, and beyond her design chops, I cannot get those words out of my mouth. Beyond her design chops, Emily is a creative problem solver and a business strategist. She has owned her own graphic design firm since 2003, working with nearly every imaginable client, including small businesses, giant corporations, nonprofits, and community organizations. So I'm so thrilled to be talking to them both about the Bucks County Beacon and beyond. Cyril, Emily, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Kevin.
Thanks.
Well, I've been looking forward to this for quite some time. I mean, we've been, obviously working together in some capacity, kind of one way or another, kind of both kind of pointing out each other's work and things like this for a while, and now kind of producing stuff for the podcast. But more importantly, like, I think the Beacon has become really this really go-to and absolutely critical voice in our communities, especially at a time when we need it so critically. But before we jump into kind of like, the background of the Beacon and some of the cool stuff that the Beacon's got going on, for those folks who might be tuning in for the first time or kind of might be a little bit more familiar with your roles and your work in there, maybe we could just kind of have you kind of talk a little bit about kind of what got you to this place, what brings you to the Beacon and to this kind of work, and introduce yourself to our listeners. Cyril, why don't we start with you, and then we can turn to Emily.
Sure. Thanks, Kevin.
Yeah.
So I'm from Bucks County. I grew up in Holland, went to St. Bede Elementary School, graduated from Council Rock, did a couple years at Bucks County Community College where I edited the student newspaper before finishing up on the West Coast. While a student, I also interned at the Chicago Reporter, where I did research, fact-checked, and assisted on a series of articles examining racial disparities in drug sentencing in Chicago and Greater Cook County, where after FOIA record requests, we were able to show that Blacks and Latinos were getting stiffer sentences than whites for the same crimes, which is an example of what you would call systemic racism, right?
Exactly.
From college, I always knew that I wanted to write and get into journalism. And so, after leaving there, it kind of like took me on this long and winding road all over the place. I did communications work for a nonprofit on campaigns in Florida against free trade deals like the FTA and CAFTA. I worked on a blog with Ed Herman, who co-wrote Manufacturing Consent with Noam Chomsky. And on that blog, we at the time, and this was like, I think it was like 2007, 2008, we were critiquing the Inquirer's editorial page, which is, a lot different, was a lot different then than it is now. And, this was a time when they were kind of like featuring far-right columnists like Rick Santorum and John Yoo, who wrote the torture memo, where the left was kind of represented by, what you might call liberal hawks or interventionists like Trudy Rubin. Eventually my journalism kind of like took me to part of that was like doing the work around like the free trade area of the Americas, the work in opposition to that, which is essentially would have, expanded NAFTA throughout the entire hemisphere.
Right.
And ended up joining the editorial collective of Upside Down World, which was an online magazine covering politics and activism in Latin America through social movement perspective. But I always kept up with like what was happening locally, what was happening in Bucks County, no matter, where in the world I was. And so I kind of always kept my ear to the ground, even if from abroad, about things happening politically, as well as obviously the kind of like reading the local newspapers, the Courier, the Intel, and to a lesser extent the Herald, just to keep up with what was happening kind of where I grew up, right? And then at the time I also kind of like drop a guest column into the Courier here and there, but didn't really and then eventually ended up getting offered a space to write a column twice a month for the Courier and the Intelligencer, and that lasted about 14 months.
It didn't take you too long to get under their skin, I think.
No, because I mean, this was a paper that like traditionally, either blocked out or marginalized progressive voices, and instead, and this was, has been part of my critique of the two daily newspapers now owned by Gannett. They also kind of like platformed, um, far right voices, extremist voices in Bucks County, with impunity, without any kind of left response. And I actually think that's part of the reason why extremism in Bucks flourish within the local GOP.
Yeah, 100%. I couldn't agree more with that. Certainly. So, Emily, how about you? What kind of got you to this space?
Yeah, I mean, Cyril sounds like it's kind of a winding road to get to the beacon, but mine is more winding. Um,
So now we're like in competition mode here.
yeah,
Who's got the longest road to the beacon? Yeah.
yeah. So I grew up outside of Harrisburg, PA, which is where I actually live now, in a little town called Camp Hill. I went to college in Rochester, New York. RIT, go Tigers. And I got my Bachelor of Fine Arts in Graphic Design from there. And from there, I decided to go be a free spirit and move to California. And ended up working, literally, I think I've done every job, but I worked at TGI Fridays. It was great. You had to have 20 pieces of flair. But I started my graphic design career working in real estate out there, and moved around. I lived in New York City for a while. My husband's from there. And then ended up in Arizona working for a title insurance company, doing graphic design and marketing, when the economy crashed. And Phoenix, Arizona is not the place to be when the bottom drops out of the real estate market. So I came back to Central PA, and that is when I really started working hard on making my graphic design business sustainable long term. And that is also when I started doing campaign mailers for political campaigns. I kind of fell into that. I was doing direct mail for real estate agents for the 5 years previous to that as just part of my day to day. And it turns out being an expert at sending out mail is something that not a lot of people are. So
No, it's sought after. Seriously, I mean, I know people on political, especially when you get into local campaigns, like somebody knows how to do that and like wants to do it. It's like gold.
yeah, so it turned out I was gold in Harrisburg for the Republicans. And they had more money than the Democrats. So I did lots of campaign mailers for Republicans for the better part of a decade as just one of the many clients I had. That wasn't my main client, but that was one of them. I may have made campaign mailers for Scott Perry's campaign, and I've been regretting it ever since. He seemed like a good guy. So once I realized that he got elected and that was terrible, and that there was all of these questionable people that I was designing mailers for, I decided I needed to volunteer for the local Democrats, which I did. So I started volunteering for a local Democratic committee, probably in 2015, 2016, somewhere around there. And at the same time, Ben Waxman, now State Representative Ben Waxman, was running for State House in the 182nd. And he asked me, because I am this campaign mailer expert, he asked me to do that for him. And
this is like a tip for everybody out there. You want to get into politics, campaign mailers. This is like
right. You never know. You never know how it's going to go. Yeah. So then I had a little hiatus from campaign mailers while I was still making them for people. I decided to sell real estate for 5 years. I was pretty good at it. I still sell houses. That is not a plug for real estate. I don't want to sell houses, but if people ask me, I will. But the pandemic hit, and Ben Waxman called me and said he wanted me to work for his PR company. So I couldn't even show a house. I didn't
Yeah.
have, there was no marketing budget anywhere for anyone. So I was like, okay, let's go. So I started working for Ben in August of 2020, and we did a lot of work with unions and politicians and various advocacy organizations, um, which kind of led into this. But beyond that, I also have worked on like all of these small businesses. Like there's all these different parts of my trail that are going different directions.
Yeah.
But like I built a financial web application for fractionalized investments in multifamily real estate. That was 10 years ago. But I've been building these small businesses for people and bigger businesses for many years. And you never know how it's going to turn out. Turns out I've been in quite a few startups though, and I kind of know the path to get where you need to go. And that's how I ended up doing this.
Well, that's a great way in, because one of the things I wanted to talk about is those kind of early days of the Beacon, and that's something I didn't know. I mean, you said you've been, working with startups for a while and kind of know the path. And I mean, I can tell you that, like my experience of starting things up has to do with being in a punk rock community, starting zines. Like literally that's like where my experience came from. And over and over and over again in different locations, starting up independent publications that were for very small areas, but never really having that background experience, and always asking that question, how the hell do you do this, right? And make it sustainable, make it something that is workable, and know what you don't know. I mean, that was always the biggest thing, is being able to find folks to be willing to just say, hey, this is how you do this, right? It always felt like, just kind of, okay, we're just going to piece this together. So knowing that you had some of this background already before you ever came to the Beacon, that's awesome. So maybe you can, as just, right now, I think it's fair to say that the Beacon has become just like essential reading for this community, especially. And I think a lot of things came together around that. Of course, there's like our politics like went off the freaking rails. And then our school boards decided to hop on the caboose to those, the train, right, so to speak. And so in some ways, like, thank God for the Beacon is done here. But it wasn't always that, right? I mean, so you say like, the pathway of the startup. So maybe kind of take us back to some of those kind of like early days, if you will, like when you're kind of sitting there, what you're hoping the Beacon could become, where you wanted to go with this, and then how we got from this, idea, right, and startup thing to like really a news source that is virtually the only critical voice in our community that is unpacking and uncovering like the extremism, right? So I mean, I don't know if that's too much to lay on the table, but I mean, I think that, I'm really fascinated by that, because I mean, it seems, I think for a lot of folks that like all of a sudden it's like there was nothing, and then now we have the Beacon, right? But we know it's not just
Yeah.
like magic, right? It's work.
It's definitely not just like magic. I mean, I think we started it at a time that was perfect for us to start it. I don't think it would have flourished into this had there not been some really crazy stuff going on with, school boards and stuff like that. But the very early days, Ben, I don't know what anyone knows about Ben Waxman, but he used to be a journalist before he worked in politics, and he always wanted to start a newspaper, and he loves politics and government. He's kind of obsessed, but I am too. I am actually an elected official too, so that happened after we started the Beacon. But it is one of those things. If you have the obsession with something, you have the opportunity to make it work. So how did we start? We started coming up with ideas. We had some locals in Bucks County that were interested in something, and the question first was, will it work?
Yeah.
So the first thing I did was I did all the market research that, no one wants to do, but you have to do if you're going to start a real business.
Yeah.
So I did a bunch of market research. I figured out what our market size was, where we would get money from, how much money we might be able to get. And let me tell you, if anyone ever tells you that your financial projections will be correct, they are wrong, because it's never correct.
That's for
But
sure.
luckily, we had some runway with funding to make it start. But the main thing, we did it in phases. First, it was what would the website look like? Do the business plan, and then it's like, well, what is the minimum viable product, right? That's something in startup world. What can you start with that will prove out the concept before you put in big money towards anything. So we did that, and our plan was just to make it an aggregator of information about local politics and government. And then we were just going to have like one writer. And the further we got into it, the more we realized like I was aggregating the news, right?
Mm-hmm.
I was the one doing it, and I was realizing there was nothing out
Yeah.
there. That was the problem. And so then it became, how much original reporting can we get? So first we hired Joey Sweeney, who is of celebrity fame. I don't know if anyone knows him, but he founded Celebrity in 2004. He's a really interesting guy. He came and was writing for us in August, September, October of 2021. And we realized it just wasn't a good fit. And then Linda Lee came to write for us, and she started writing for us, and she was writing some really good stories. I mean,
That's
Linda
when I first became aware of the Beacon, actually. I was seeing her stuff and being like, what is this Beacon thing? Right? And this
Yeah.
Linda Lee, this is like, she was doing some really great stuff.
Yeah. She used to be an editor for the New York Times for 20 years. She's published 6 or 7 books on all sorts of various topics, some fiction, some nonfiction, but she is an excellent writer. So she was writing for us. But when we got to the end of that year, 2021, it became clear that we were gaining a little traction. We were getting people to look at our website, which was my big thing that I wasn't sure was ever going to happen.
Yeah.
And then we decided that we would put a little bit more money in and see if we could add a writer, add an editor. We were still trying to figure out who was going to be the thing to make it right. And like iteration is everything in startups. So you start, you try, you figure out the problem, you move on to the next thing. So that's what we did. And I asked Cyril to work for me in January, I think, of 2022. I think he started in February 2022. And that's when it really took off. Was, once I got Cyril on board and he started to really build out the people that were writing for us and figured out how to get more content for our website besides aggregating news. Because I knew the more original content we had, the more readers we had.
Yep.
And that was the key to the whole thing.
So that's kind of really, and like, so right ahead, before Cyril comes on, right, this is when Cyril had been writing for the Courier Times, right, Cyril? You had had the column there, and you were starting to kind of, people were kind of noticing this. I remember your articles are getting shared around quite a bit. They're getting more uncomfortable reporting. You're getting more aggressive in your reporting, and you're kind of in your commentary. And then this opens up, and it seems like, I mean, I'm not big on like, this is fated in the stars or something like this, but I mean, holy crap, was that fortuitous, right? For the Beacon. I mean, so like Cyril, just on kind of the build on that. So when you saw what the Beacon was doing and you had this opportunity, was that kind of for you? Was that like, all right, let's do this, but you've worked in independent media for quite some time, so I mean, as well as anybody too that it's not like a cakewalk, right? I mean, that it's work to build this stuff up. But I have to say, it was absolutely remarkable to see how many people were coming on board and the quality of work that started coming out almost immediately. And that was happening just as the crazy was really ramping up here in Bucks.
Sure. No, I mean, I was really excited and grateful first to kind of come on as a columnist, and then shortly afterwards, Emily asking me to go ahead and just kind of like take the reins as editor. Um, you know, I was really just enthusiastic about the idea of building kind of progressive independent media in Bucks County, and seeing what kind of impact it could have locally. And I had a vision, for how I wanted to help build it out, and part of it is just kind of like recognizing the failures of the two dailies, the Bucks County Courier Times and the Intelligencer, um, and their failure to kind of report on the growing right-wing extremism that had been percolating even before Trump, right? So like the beacon is, one, we're shining a light on the extremism, right? Uh, and then two, we're platforming and essentially being a megaphone for progressive voices in the community who have historically been kind of marginalized or ignored by local mainstream corporate media, right? Um, and one of the things I did is just like, even before I started writing, about things that were happening in Bucks County, there's in Pennsylvania, as well as, there had already been this like kind of like amazing kind of like community on the ground, kind of doing the work. Um, but it was just, unless you were kind of like really tapped into that, you didn't know much about it. So
Right.
like one of the good things about writing for the Courier was like it was an education for me, right? To kind of learn about all the amazing people in Bucks County, who were fighting for LGBTQ rights, fighting for environmental rights, right? Fighting for like inclusive education, um, you know and just fighting against the MAGA or Tea Party, or even farther to the right, militia and other extremists, that were really infecting the area locally. And then another result of my column is like I'm building this network of folks who you know have multiple talents, and for many of them, like writing is one of them, right?
Yeah.
So we've been able to kind of like build a roster of writers in Bucks County, throughout Pennsylvania, and even nationally, to report on and interrogate the issues that the corporate media is either ignoring, or they don't have the reporters to kind of cover everything. Because local media in Bucks County and across the country has been hollowed out.
Right.
The Courier Times is at one point a couple decades ago, probably, if you consider all the writers, editors, stringers, etc., probably had dozens of people, and now you could probably fit the entire staff in a bathtub. Where on the other hand, we're growing. Our roster of writers are growing, and we're really digging into the stories, whether it's in Penridge, school board, which has been neglected at times by the local media, or Central Bucks, and really and really just like not just reporting, but doing like giving like reporting with depth and breadth, and really kind of like digging into like the policies and the issues that are kind of like impacting the community, as well as kind of broadening the voices that are represented in media, um, either by people who we're interviewing, or people who are writing, like say someone like Leo Burchell, who wrote an amazing op-ed about what it's like being a trans student in Central Bucks School
Yeah.
District. Right, you're not going to get that anywhere else. You're just not.
No, and I think the beacon, and I've said this to each of you like in different ways and different times, maybe not all at once, but I think part of the role there too is, one, to build any kind of sustainable movement that's capable of resisting this kind of extremism. Like, you need to be able to kind of see yourself back, right? From an activist and community member sense, right? I mean, one of the struggles that's always true in any kind of organizing work that you do is to actually have your message actually be the one that is told in a way that you recognize it, right? And that is so critical because otherwise you never know, right? And you know, it's so difficult to get a barometer of how, you know, uh, how successful your movement is. Am I making a difference? Does this matter? I'm going to these school board meetings, but it seems like I'm shouting, into the void, right? So to have kind of reporters cover your movement and your actions in a way that you recognize, right, is also part of what makes it sustainable to build those movements. And I've heard this from people again and again who said, thank God for the beacon. Like, the beacon's the one who's reporting on this. I've said this to you. I mean, who's reporting on Penridge, right? I mean, where my kids are at. I mean, Central Bucks has got the benefit of money, right? It's got the benefit of money and clout. Well, Penridge does not, right? And yet we are now the test case nationally, right, for bringing in kind of Christian nationalist kind of companies, right, to change our curriculum. I mean, who's saying that? I mean, the only other reporters like Emily Rizzo, who used to be down at WHYY, suddenly her voice has disappeared, right? And the Beacon has been the only one that has been able to consistently stay on that kind of story. And then the flip side of it too, as well, is what I think the Beacon has done a remarkable job of is like doing that really on the ground local reporting. Like, I mean, how many school board meetings have you all sat through and watched and go through so that you can write this stuff? But on the flip side of it too, as well, reaching out to provide context, right? Because that's also the problem is like, how many people were taken by surprise to suddenly that you're finding what appears to be absolutely insane things being said at your school board meeting and thinking like, oh, maybe that's just one person who's, needs a little help. But turns out, no, there's a national movement. And until you have somebody that can help put those pieces together, right, it can seem like you're in this kind of other planet. So thank you for that work too, is that because it's like both giving voice to and giving a mirror to the community who's actually doing this work on the ground, but also kind of allowing for those spaces to expand our understanding of what's happening so that, that feeds back into the tools that help us be better organizers to combat this stuff. But it's
Yeah,
just been
I would
crazy.
just say, like, I'd just like to add to this that there's this, like, growing movement for news being civic information. And I think that, Cyril brings a lot to the table with all of the voices that he brings in to talk about advocacy. But one of the big things that's always been important to me is like contextualizing what happens when decisions get made at school boards, at borough councils, by township supervisors. And if it doesn't get reported on, then people don't understand
Yes.
why things are happening or why voting is important. And that's been the biggest thing for us is to get out the information. Here's where you vote. Here's what happens. These people got elected. This is what it's going to mean for the community.
Yeah, it's like the election has consequences thing, right? And be able to kind
Yeah,
of demonstrate that pretty effectively. And I also think that, it's like for the longest time you see like, oh, school boards are so boring and all this other stuff. Well, really, you know what, maybe they're not boring. Like maybe the news that is happening literally down the street, right, that is going to have the most impact upon your life and your kids' life, right, and your community's life, maybe those are good. Maybe just a matter of being able to tell those stories, right? And that's, again, I mean, this is where else have you seen this? I mean, that's what's remarkable, to see the voices of people in our community, and having their stories tell and having them help tell these stories, and then have the beacon kind of contextualize you, bring it back, is so critical. And I've seen this in some of the organizing around, people running for school board. Right, two cycles ago, it was kind of like an upstart group of folks that were like, okay, we got to figure out how to do this, and now they're like learning and they're continuing, it's being sustained, and that's happening like all across the region. So, and I think, there hasn't been a social movement where kind of, independent, aggressive, fearless media has not been an absolute critical component to that. Right. And like, again, I mean, kind of like to your point, there's this civic education, right? Doesn't mean it's the same thing as a movement, right? It has a different
right.
role, right? These are two different distinct things, but it's absolutely critical. And there's just no other example when that kind of the independent press has not been critical. So, but I could go on with that line forever, but I'm going to stop myself purposely because what I wanted to
Me
do
too.
is, yeah, no, yeah, continue. Okay, and now for my next advertisement. No, but it's I'm interested in just what seems like so much has happened, but I'm wondering, and I don't want to put you too much on the spot here, but if there's like a couple like of say articles that you could point back to since the Beacon has started that for whatever reason stand out to you, whether it's for their impact or kind of like what you thought it did or kind of a range of perspective or something that was new or something that kind of broke through. Emily, maybe we could start with you as like any of those kind of articles that came out or what you did in the Beacon seemed to really kind of jump to the fore.
Yeah, I mean, I was rereading many articles that we've put out over the last 2 years because it's been a little over 2 years since we started publishing original content. So I was looking through a lot of that today and I got very nostalgic because I'm the only one that's been here the whole time. It's kind of shocking to me what's going on. But so the ones I picked out that I think are the most interesting might not be interesting for the reasons that, would maybe interest the rest of the population of Bucks County. So like one was when Joey Sweeney was our editor initially. It was in October of 2021. He wrote a story called Having Trouble Keeping All Your Bucks School Wackadoos Straight. Cyril Mychalejko has a Substack for that. And it was like a love letter to Cyril and what a good job he was doing. And that was like, 4 months before I called him and was like, can you please work for us? So it's funny to me that when I read that today, I was like, yep, that's it. I had already been like reading all of his stuff. So it was meant to be.
Yeah.
And then the second one I picked is actually one I wrote when I was aggregating stuff. I would pull stories from the internet and then just write a little paragraph above it. And I ended up doing a bunch of research on this one. It was from December 21. It was called Central Bucks Woke Bucks County Pushing to Ban Books. And for me, the story was much more interesting than it had been covered in the paper because it looked like as a web developer, right? Here I am as a web developer looking at this Woke Bucks County website, and all I could tell myself was, I know that that's a template,
Yep.
And as soon as I did any research at all, I found out there was a kit from Parents Defending Freedom, and Parents Defending Freedom is funded by the Heritage Foundation. And, that was like the most eye-opening thing to me, like, oh, here is the right-wing machine.
Yep.
Pretending to have grassroots. Yeah. So that one was a big deal for me because it really got me interested in like who's telling the truth, what's real. At the same time, there was people in my school district who it was the beginning of the Moms for Liberty movement.
Yep.
And you're like, not all the moms in the country could simultaneously be thinking the same thing.
It's like, a mom thing, Emily. Come on, it's a mom thing.
Right. I'm a mom, didn't feel that way. Yeah. So yeah, I would say that was a big one. And then I would say the first one that really like hit it out of the park was when Linda, it was shortly after Cyril started working for us writing a column. Actually he might have been editor-in-chief by then. I'm not sure. Were you? Yes. It was so much for election integrity, forged petitions mar Republican PA01 congressional candidate. It was about Dasha Pruitt.
Yep.
And all her forged petitions. And it, it soared.
I remember that story went nuts.
Yeah.
That story went, and and no one would have known a thing about it had she not reported on that.
Right. And then she withdrew her petitions.
Yep.
And she left.
And we
back
don't
to
even know who
Montgomery
this person is any longer.
Right, yeah. So that one worked out. And then the last one I would say is actually pretty recent. I want to say it's from this past summer. We had Peter Green do a story on the Bradley Foundation. And it is like my little private obsession to research the Bradley Foundation and figure out where their tentacles are. And I'm currently doing research on another thing that about the Bradley Foundation that is boggling my mind. But that is the primer, is Peter Green's article, "The Arch Conservative Bradley Foundation is Waging a War on Democracy." If your listeners haven't read that article yet,
read it.
Highly recommend, because the Bradley Foundation has more money than the Koch brothers by a lot.
It's insane. Right? I remember learning about this after after the Tea Party elections and after the stuff about the Koch brothers broke, and then on some random reporting at the time they were talking about the Bradley Foundation. I think it was in relationship to charter schools in Philadelphia, actually, when they were shopping their kind of their playbook to different cities, and I was like reading some. I'm like, oh my God, this can't be real. Like, this is like the science fiction's conspiracy crap that I grew up reading, It's nuts.
Yeah, and you can just spend like a day going in one direction from the Bradley Foundation to figure out where things go and get lost. And that only covers this one little tiny piece of what they're funding in the United States.
Yeah.
So,
yeah. So, Cyril, how about you? What sticks out to you since you've been around?
Sure. I mean, one thing that I'm, particularly proud of is our Moms for Liberty coverage. This nationally recognized extremist group who had collaborated with the Proud Boys, militia folks whose hateful warrior moms have said that, they want LGBTQ kids to be segregated from everyone else, accused teachers and librarians of being groomers and pedophiles. They have their national summit in Philly. And, they have a local chapter that's very active, right? That's supporting candidates like Art DiMartino and Dana Hunter and Central Bucks. And we decided that it was important for us to cover this summit. And so we sent a reporter, Pat LaMarche, there, who reported from inside before getting singled out and eventually booted out for her critical reporting, as well as kind of like in the lead up and during, also providing publishing more analysis by experts like our education columnist Peter Green, Morris Cunningham, and then like after the fact providing more context through the podcast The Signal by having Olivia Little on from Media Matters, who was inside undercover as well, Diana Legerman, who has just been like a fierce force in organizing against Moms for Liberty in Bucks County, and then also kind of us publishing the leaked audio of Jordan Adams' presentation, which is huge
that was unbelievable. I mean, that was like a gift to the world, right?
It's still getting views on our YouTube page.
Unbelievable.
And so like that whole package of articles was great. I mean, Jenny Stevens is just a nonstop. She's just, she's our staff writer, in addition to our various freelance writers, but the work that she does, in Penridge, like what we've mentioned before, or even in Central Bucks, or just talking about what local, Democratic candidates are doing, or just, with what, Brian Fitzpatrick is voting on, she's been such an invaluable addition to the Bucks County Beacon. I really liked, we sent Zach Roberts undercover in the Quakertown because there was this, this friendly little picnic with constitutional sheriffs, Proud Boys, Moms for Liberties, John Birch Society, just the whole carnival, right? And again, like you're not going to get that reporting in other local media here in Bucks County. Obviously Jenny Cohn, her columns for us, have been amazing. She's been a step ahead often at times with her reporting on, Christian nationalism and the broader Christian right. More recently, I was really liked her. She did a couple profiles. One was of Scott Pressler, a far right MAGA activist who is working with the local Bucks GOP, as well as her profile of Abby Abildness. Um, and Abby is kind of like a prayer warrior for the new apostolic reformation, which is a dominionist movement, which wants to claim the seven mountains of society for God. And then just the way we kind of been able to use the podcast to complement our reporting. I had Frederick Clarkson on shortly afterwards, who's a senior research analyst at Political Research Associates, and an expert on the Christian right and the NAR. And he came on to kind of just provide more detail and context, about this theocratic movement, which is growing in Pennsylvania, which Doug Mastriano is a part of, who want to build a kingdom revolution led by an army of believers starting in Pennsylvania and using that as a springboard for the entire country and the world. And part of me wants to mention everyone because there's so many good voices, right? I mean, whether it's Layla Casey, who's reporting from Central Bucks, Kadita Kenner, who's the head of the New Pennsylvania Project. She writes a regular column for us. Molly Parson from Conservation Voters of PA. Kirsten Zolfo, who's reporting about the Fitzpatrick votes that the other newspapers won't report on, or Kevin Levin talking about the struggle against racism, and for like racial justice in Bucks County. So it's hard to choose favorites, but those are some of the highlights. And again, like we've built such a roster of dozens of writers who either contribute regularly or from time to time, and that's part of the beauty of the Bucks County Beacon. It's really like we the Beacon. Like the Beacon is like Bucks County and the progressive community in Bucks County, and their voices that are coming out.
No, absolutely. And I mentioned this to you both before, and I want to talk about where the Beacon's going from here. And I want to talk about your fall fund drive that's coming up, because I think it's absolutely critical that we have a number one, that we kind of think about why it's important to fund there, but also kind of the impact. And, I mentioned this, I think, on one of the calls that we were all on is, I look at something that we used to call back in my early days of Raging Chicken was called break and push, right? That basically the kind of reporting that you can do locally, right, is not going to be of immediate interest to kind of a national audience, right? But you're the only ones that can do it, right? And really understand the players and really understand and do this. So the question is like, how do you kind of, link up, build these networks so those stories go big? And perfect example, just last week on September 13th, the Southern Poverty Law Center published a whole report, right, called When Moms for Liberty Flips a School Board. And guess who they're talking about? They're talking about Penridge School District. And guess who's one of the first people that they quote in there? It's Jenny Stevens, right? Jenny Stevens from the Bucks County Beacon, as her reporting is where they go to first. And I also love the fact the first picture they got there is of Jane Kramer. And it's a picture by Sean Kitchen, who got his start with Raging Chicken when we were first doing the writing and investigative work, right? And so there's the impact, right? I mean, you're talking about being able to make that connection, because not only does this become valuable to the immediate community, but it's a story that other people can make use of and understand what's going to happen in their districts, right? So it's not just like, okay, here, this is just a school district that's happening here, and that's just a little tiny story, but it's connected to this kind of bigger context and movement. So that's great. And the other thing that I really appreciate that you all did is kind of reaching out to one of my colleagues, Mike Gambone, who goes out and kind of does book reviews. I mean, I run into Mike in the hallways. I'm like, Mike, you're like expanding my bookshelf like by the week. I'm like, thank you. But that same kind of idea, like stuff that is going to be useful, but we know that not people got busy lives, right? Need to find a way of kind of like bringing this content in and what you're doing in the Beacon. So enough of the boosterism for the moment, because like I said, I'll do this every day, all day long. This is because the Beacon needs to succeed, and you've got a fall fund drive that's kind of coming up here, and I know that's connected to where you want to be. And things that you want to do down the road. And just to kind of kick us off, one of the things that the plug that I'll put in is that something that I said on my podcast this past week is that, look, this funding, being a key source of funding as being community members who are involved in this, right? That helps the Beacon also be accountable to us, right? To the community. As rich and as important as the Beacon is to us, right? Is like, I can tell you, the folks that are writing for the Beacon, the folks who are on the show tonight, would like nothing better to have all of us be their bosses, right? So that, and that's what it is. And again, that's what we want. We don't have like a big, like, line of billionaires kind of fighting with each other, or who's going to throw the next like $2 million in the pocket, right? But we have us, right? A conglomeration of how we make this work. And so I was thrilled to be able to kind of have you guys on now as you're kind of starting this fund drive, which is already off and running. I was like, looking at it today, I'm like, boom, look at this. We get key members. So maybe, I don't know how you want to kind of take this, but maybe start with Emily a little bit. Like, you got this fund drive here, kind of what you want to do, what's your hopes for this fund drive, kind of what's your pitch to folks, and also how's that going to help the Beacon be sustainable long term?
Right. So every time we do a fund drive, the goal for me is to diversify where our money comes from, and to get more people bought in. Like, I think buy-in is everything. And as you were talking about all the different people that write for us, I feel bad because some of these people that write for us also give us money, right? Like, we give them money for writing something and then they give us money back, right? But that's how strong our community is that we have right now. And we just want to expand that. So, hopefully we can get 100 new subscriber sustainer members at $10 a month, but if it's $5 a month, that's better than, a stick in the eye, right?
Yeah.
What we're constantly trying to do is just increase our ability to both have more original content, which costs money, right? The more we do, the more it costs. But also to pay the people that do work for us fair money. As someone who's come from like a business corporate background, like, there's a lot of people that make a lot more money than journalists, and I think it's so sad. I have been shocked and appalled to find out how much journalists make, and I don't want that to be the Beacon. I want us to be able to offer people what they deserve, and time off, and not be burned out. And all of those things cost money. I'd like to give Cyril like a month-long vacation. It's not happening, but
Yeah, just your heads up here, Cyril. Nope. That ask is not
a month.
I'm already booking my flight.
I'm taking him to Durham for a conference. That's the best I can do this year. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So our ask is please become a sustaining member of the Bucks County Beacon so that we can afford to pay people and we can cover more things. And one other thing is that, I think when you were talking about, break and push, right? One of the things that's always been very apparent to me is that, especially with the right-wing movements that are going on, our reporting is the same. Like, we might have different names of the people in the Bucks County stories, but the same thing is happening all over the country in lots of communities.
Yes.
So, for us to be able to tell the story and have people understand what's going on where they live, means a lot, So, yes, please become a sustaining member.
How about you, Cyril?
Yeah, no, I mean, we definitely want to reach that goal of 100 for this fall fund drive. And some of the things we'd like to do is we'd like to kind of double our freelance budget so that the writers we do have can write more often, as well as continuing to expand our roster of writers. I also want us to kind of expand our podcast projects, like Kevin mentioned earlier, and Kevin's been a huge part of this project.
Huge.
I do what I can
He's been
do.
producing our podcasts. Um, you know, the Signal, I feel, has done a good job of kind of like providing context for both like national issues and how they affect us locally, and like putting like local issues into kind of the broader picture. And then we also just launched this new Gen Z podcast, which is I'm really excited about, with three
It's
like
great.
remarkably intelligent and talented young women
Yep.
leading it. I'd like to do more audio work in the future, and some of it might even be kind of like long form audio storytelling, in addition to the kind of like traditional like podcast Q&A, or just kind of you know chatting kind of format. But we really, if we're going to be around for the long haul, like the community needs to invest in us, right? Invest in this media project, so that we can kind of continue to report on the stories that are either underreported or often neglected by other sources. And one last pitch for that is just like, one of the things we've been successful in doing is kind of influencing other media, because our
Yes.
stories have been cited by other news sources, whether it's the Inquirer, WHYY, Salon, like you said, Southern Poverty Law Center, Time Magazine. So we're already having like a big impact, and I would almost say like punching above our weight. But
Yep.
imagine if we were able to kind of build our financial infrastructure more and grow even more. I would say like the sky's the limit about what we can accomplish.
Well, and I think that, the Bucks County Beacon for me, right, is, one of the reasons I'm so happy to be even kind of, doing what little I can, right? Like for producing the podcast and things like this is because, I believe the only way that progressive media can be, you know, effective and sustainable is to having a network of support, right? Where yes, we may have, say, individual projects and things like this, but recognizing that can be a real strength, right? Where we could lend it. And I really think, I mean, right now for me, the Bucks County Beacon is the hub. Right. It's the hub around that we should, no matter, I don't care if you have a podcast, you got a YouTube show, you kind of write columns, you write a blog and things like this. All of our work, right, seems to be, dependent to a certain degree about the success of this project, right? I mean, it's already incredibly successful. As Cyril has said, you're punching above your weight. And we know that that can happen, is that once you've got this quality of work that is being done, and just like Emily said, you want to be able to get to the point where the quality kind of matches the payment, right? And I'll say, like, I'll come at it from like a labor perspective too as well. That has been always one of my struggles is working in this space, is that it's like a deal with the devil. And like as much as I can remember, like the Democracy Now! Out of New York, which was a show, for example, that I have been dependent upon and that was so incredible, is so like absolutely amazing. So much of that show, and you talk to people who've worked there, so much of that show is dependent upon unpaid interns to do most of the heavy lifting. And people want to critique them for it, and we can put in that critique, but at the same time, that what are your options? Right, is that if you want the thing to be successful, you got to have people, right? Because like when Emily, when you're saying, like, because look, it costs money, right? It costs money because guess what, there's people doing work. Right.
Right.
Right, and then there's bandwidth and there's all this other kind of stuff that has to go in. And so that's what I look at it, like supporting the Beacon and kind of getting behind and make sure that we kind of like hit that 100 new subscriber goal for the Beacon, right? Is like our saying that, yes, right, we are invested in this project from top to bottom. Right, we want the reporting, we want the content, but we also want to know that we're going to support the people who are making it work, right? And that's where I really think that whatever you can throw in, right? Become a subscriber. You can go in at the, go like $5 a month, $10 a month. You got $100 to drop. Rumor has it there's a T-shirt that's connected to that,
Yeah. Yeah.
right? So I mean, again, we don't. It doesn't everybody doesn't have to be the kind of top donor here, right? But if like a little bit, a lot of a little helps a ton to make a project like this sustainable. And I'm invested in the success of the Beacon because I'm invested in the kind of, or not even invested, but I think it's absolutely necessary to have like the Beacon and the outlet like the Beacon to be able to kind of push back against what we're facing right now, which is pretty dire when you really look into the the abyss. So
Yeah, I mean, I would just say one other thing about that is that, like, journalism has been dying and trying to be reborn for some time now.
yeah,
There is not a good funding structure that works to actually like align with what the news that needs to be told. And we're trying to figure it out. So are a lot of other people, but like figuring out how to fund journalism is and sustainably is, I think, imperative to democracy. Because if we don't figure it out, journalism dies, and if journalism dies, people don't know what's going on, and if people don't know what's going on, they're going to get taken advantage of. You know,
game is up.
so it's a really important, like, larger mission, beyond the smaller mission of let's report all of the important news in Bucks County. Is also like, how do you make a sustainable journalism outfit, you know, that's not owned by hedge funds,
Right.
That pays their people a fair wage to do the work, that you have enough people to go to the school board meetings. I think that's the key, and we want to figure it out, and this is how we think is the right way. So you don't have to stare at all of the ads, and you don't have to have news behind a paywall. Like, I don't believe that paywalls make sense because we're trying to put out news that people need to know, regardless of whether they can afford to pay.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. Well, this has been great, and I know I've kept you both much longer than I than I said I would. But I mean, the story needs to be told, and and I think it's a perfect time for it. But as by way of kind of closing us out, I mean, Cyril and Emily, either or both of you, um, other than I mean, the perfect pitch you just gave, Emily. Is there anything else that you want to kind of leave folks, right? As before we close out for the night, and everybody kind of heads over to their computer to make sure that they hit that subscribe to the Bucks County Beacon link, by the way. And you can head over, by the way, if you just go to kind of buckscountybeacon.com, right? You can click on support the Beacon or just scroll down a little bit. You'll get a little pop up, let you know about the fundraiser. So it's a really piece of cake to do. You can click on it. You can give what you can. But kind of closing thoughts, Cyril, Emily?
Sure. I just want to thank each and every one of our writers and contributors who have been part of this media movement in Bucks County, and as well as thank the folks who support us, whether it's financially, whether it's sharing our articles, to friends and colleagues, or sharing it on social media. Um, as well as just people reaching out to us with story ideas. The Bucks County Beacon wouldn't be what it is now without all of you participating in the process. So I just want to thank you all.
yeah, I feel like I've already said a lot tonight, and I feel like what Cyril just said is perfect. So I'm just thanking Cyril and Kevin.
Well, I thank both of you, and I'll echo
Thank you.
what Cyril has said. Thanks to everybody out there who has been knocking doors, who has been showing up at school board meetings week after week, who has been feeding stories to the Beacon, who's kind of come on our show, who's been on Cyril's show, who's been doing that kind of work. And, if anything, I hope what you're hearing here tonight is like that us in this kind of space, we want to make sure that we are here and sustainable. And the Bucks County Beacon is the place, in my mind, that we really need to kind of go in on all in on and make sure that we have the sustainable. So head on over to buckscountybeacon.com, hit that little support the beacon, wait for the pop-up, give what you can, help them hit that 100 new subscribers kind of goal. And how about this? Let's smash right through that, right? Let's show us what this community is all made of, and let's kind of help support this so that we make sure that never again will we be left in the dark in a news desert while right-wing extremists take over our community while we leave the doors unlocked. We cannot let that happen again. So thank you, Cyril. Thank you, Emily, for everything you do. And thank you for coming and hanging out with me tonight.
Thanks, Kevin.
Thank you.
You betcha. All right, everybody, you got it. I am totally revved up now. I was exhausted. I'm not feeling well, and now I'm gonna I don't know how I'm gonna get to sleep. I'm very excited about this. So thank y'all for coming out tonight, and thank you for all those who showed up here to tune in live. Make sure you share the show. Make sure you hit that subscribe button on our YouTube channel. Make sure you hit that little bell so you get notifications every time we go live. And thank you to all our podcast listeners. Make sure you head on over to support the beacon, buckscountybeacon.com. Hit support the beacon. Scroll down. Give what you can. Become a subscriber. Help them hit that 100 new subscriber goal. Oh God, this is great. All right, this is Kevin Mahoney, editor and founder of Raging Chicken. Look, we'll be back on Friday for a little bit. There's just crazy amounts of stuff that is going on. Got some cool stuff coming out too as well, but I'm going to keep that for another date and time. Thank you all. Have a great one.
See ya.